the ongoing impact of COVID-19 on LSE grantees' business models and operations with 4 leaders from grantee organizations. Today we have Jim Cook, Executive Director at Idaho Legal Services. Also with us, Yvonne Maria Jimenez, President and CEO at Neighborhood Legal Services of Los Angeles County. Jonathan Menina, Executive Director at Community Legal Aid in Massachusetts. And Kate McGarvey, Executive Director at Ohio State Legal Services Association, and they're all here to share their insights. Thank you so much, panelists, for joining us. And to begin, I'd like to invite each of you to share some information about the program you lead. Please tell us about your geographic service area, organizational size in terms of staff and offices, the clients you serve, and perhaps any case trends as of late. Jonathan, will you start us off?
Again, my name's Jonathan Menina. I'm the Executive Director of Community Legal Aid. We are the program that covers Central and Western Massachusetts. So Worcester County is our main administrative office in the center of the state, but we also cover the West, including the Berkshires. We have about 120 staff that work in 5 offices across our service area. We also have a bunch of what we call satellite offices that staff use to meet with clients, but we don't staff them every day. We closed about 3,000 cases, I think, by last count over a year. In terms of client trends, lot to discuss, but the things that come to mind most readily, we've seen a pretty large increase in requests from people who are seeking help accessing emergency shelters in our state. Because of all the evictions going on, loss of income, people are struggling to get into shelters. I would also say recently, when the pandemic-related unemployment benefits ended, we've had a lot more requests for people with help trying to access cash supports and income supports from our local welfare offices. So that's been a recent trend.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. Kate?
I'm the Executive Director of Ohio State Legal Services Association, and we are a program that covers 36 counties in central and southeastern Ohio. So we go from Steubenville in Ohio all the way over to Columbus, which is the state capital, and then all the way down to Portsmouth, which is on the river with West Virginia. So we have a pretty broad range of both Appalachia as well as one of the big cities in Columbus, which has had a very big influx of refugees over the past 20 years or so. And so we have a pretty diverse group of folks that we serve within those 36 counties. We do that through 8 offices, which we do have staffed, and with about 142 staff. We closed about 15,000 cases in 2020. In terms of trends, somewhat similar to what was mentioned earlier, we continue to see a high amount of eviction cases. We continue to see a higher than average amount of unemployment cases. So those right now are overpayment cases, but also folks whose cases just haven't been determined yet, who are still waiting for benefits. The conversation earlier was very interesting to me. I was going to mention, as one of our trends, we have seen an increase in debt collection cases. We do always see a fair number of those cases, but we have seen those increase over the pandemic, as well as auto fraud cases have also been up significantly.
Thank you, Kate. Jim, why don't you share a little bit about Idaho?
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me today. It's funny, I'm from the biggest state with the smallest population here. We are a statewide program, and we represent the state of Idaho, which is roughly 82,000 square miles. And it's a big state with about 1.8 million people, growing by the day. And it's an interesting state because, in a way, it's kind of the leftovers of the other states that were created around it. And so the North is sort of oriented to Eastern Washington. The East is oriented to Salt Lake City and Utah. And what's left is oriented to Southwest Idaho, which is the political, population, and economic center. And the state's interesting. It's over half owned by the federal government. Of the 44 counties, 38 are considered rural by the U.S. Census Bureau. Our population is a little over 80% Anglo. We have about 14% Latino. We have 5 federally recognized Indian reservations. The Coeur d'Alene, the Kootenai in the north, the Nez Perce in the central. We have the Duck Valley Reservation in the southwest, which is the Shoshone-Paiute. And then in the southeast, we have Fort Hall, which is the Shoshone-Bannock. We have an Indian law unit that makes great effort to serve as many Native American reservation clients as we can. We also have a migrant farm worker law unit. In terms of our staffing, we have about 45 staff in 7 regional offices. Our offices correspond to Idaho's 7 judicial districts. Each office serves between 4 and 10 surrounding counties. Some of those are huge districts. It may take 3 hours to drive to court in some of them. So they're very large areas for our small offices. We help offset that with 3 attorney staff legal advice lines: domestic violence, housing, and senior. And during the pandemic, we had a COVID line, which we've recently discontinued. If we want to talk about trends here, it's just housing. I mean, there's been an increase in many different areas, but housing is the area that I will talk about later in some of the other questions, but it's the demand for housing as the state has been growing and as much of the state has been gentrifying and pushing out the native Idahoans is the biggest issue we're facing. I would say, though, anecdotally, I have not done a lot of research on this. There seems to be this industry that works to prey on senior citizens in this country. And I have been seeing, just in the last couple of weeks even, cases where seniors are reaching out to us after losing a whole lot of money from online sharks and predatory schemes. And that seems to be something that's unfortunately trending upward, which I'm hoping we can try to better address. Thank you.
Thank you. And Yvonne.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation. I'm Yvonne Maria Jimenez, and I'm the president and CEO of Neighborhood Legal Services of Los Angeles County. In contrast to Jim's population, LA County covers about 4,700 square miles, has a population of 10 million people. Between us and our sister organization, the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles, we serve LA County. Our LSC service area spans the northern border of Los Angeles. It runs from the high desert to the low desert. It's a distance of 100 miles one way. So it's quite a distance that we cover. We have 4 main offices. We're also co-located in 9 courthouses across LA County. Our medical legal partnerships, our staff is co-located in 3 county hospitals and 8 community clinics. Our self-help centers and medical legal community partnerships are also operated in collaboration with our sister organizations, 2 other LSC funded organizations, LAFLA and Community Legal Aid of Southern California. So we have quite a large network, a well-integrated network of service delivery. We employ 170 staff. Of those, 80 are attorneys. We have a budget of about 23 million. And our largest funder is the County of Los Angeles. In 2020, despite the shutdown, we closed over 8,200 cases and we served over 100,000 people. We have a long-standing practice of working closely with our elected officials. We educate them on the services that we provide and the services we provide to their low-income constituents. We're often asked to collaborate in town halls and collaborate in educational forums. And we did that throughout 2020 during the shutdown. The primary areas of issues that were presented were housing and access to healthcare. By April of 2020, after the shutdown, the Los Angeles Times reported that almost half of all working able adults in Los Angeles County were unemployed. Therefore, unemployment became a huge need and access to unemployment benefits. And we opened up a number of clinics. In relation to the conversation regarding consumer debt, we're seeing that medical debt is leading to homelessness in Los Angeles County. Housing and homelessness is probably the greatest crisis in Los Angeles County, but we're also looking at those underlying causes, medical debt being one of them. Thank you, Ronke.
Thank you all for sharing that context for us. Next, I'd like us to consider the most salient challenges you see for staff, clients, and your communities because of the pandemic. Jim, would you like to begin?
Sure. The pandemic has been very interesting for us because it's really driven the state's population. Idaho was on an upward trajectory for some years, and then during the pandemic, it increased dramatically, and that has resulted in long-term structural changes, I think. I want to give you an example. We've been doing some internal research, and as part of that, we learned that last year, from July of 2020 to July of 2021 in the United States, housing went up 17%. In our capital of Boise, housing values went up 45.9% in 1 year. In North Idaho, in Kootenai County, that's our population center in the northern part of the state, it went up 39% in 1 year. And what this is doing here is, this is driven in part by many people who are leaving other states for places that are more affordable. Many people who are buying second homes here. There are many people coming in from California and Texas, and they have more money to purchase. And so what's happening is many of our clients are being displaced, not necessarily by eviction for non-payment of rent. Our unemployment is less than 3%, but they cannot compete in the housing marketplace. In Boise, for example, the typical house is $497,000 now, which is not a lot compared to some of the coastal states, but here that's huge. And that is driving out folks. Landlords are often just at the end of the grant period, eliminating the rental as a whole and just selling out. We've had a number of cases where the rent has gone up 100% at the end of the rental period. And so our client community is having problems finding somewhere else to go. In the old days, it was often typical that, someone ends up with a relationship that they don't like with the landlord, and they say, that's fine, I'll move. But here they're no longer having places to move to that they can afford. And so that's creating a significant problem. I was just talking to one of our attorneys last week where a lot of the RV parks and even just streets have folks that are parking mobile homes because they've lost their housing and they've bought used mobile homes or used RVs to live in. And so I am worried about the long-term impact that's going to have for the state, both as we get through the pandemic, but into the future. So that is our biggest issue here. We do have, during the pandemic, we also had a significant increase in domestic violence cases, which is not surprising. That was more in 2020 when we had many people losing jobs, especially in the service industries and others. That has changed this year in 2021. There is now a dearth of workers. Unemployment is very low in the state of Idaho. The situation more is now there's job openings everywhere, but most of the salaries are not a living wage where they can actually pay for rent. But that's the biggest issue, I think, is people have learned that they can commute from the state of Idaho in many jobs. and the housing was cheaper here. The quality of life is high. And so we've attracted a lot of folks, and that's impacted our local client community.
Thank you, Jim. Yvonne.
Sure. I think the change COVID-19 brought is that the remote operations. We were extremely fortunate to be a recipient of the Disaster Legal Services Grant from LSC, and therefore we were able to catapult into remote operations immediately. Within a week, we were at 100% capacity, all via remote. I do think that the challenge during COVID-19 and the shutdown was all related to the digital divide. The LA Superior Courts, ironically, were slow in ramping up into virtual access. Working with legal aids in the community here in Los Angeles, we were able to collaborate to get those things moving. I think that we are not caught up, and the challenge is being vigilant about leaving low-income communities behind. We have a significant number of people who do not have access via technology. One of the things we did at the end of 2020 was look at our data, and we assessed our data to see who was missing. And here were what the numbers showed. The number of people who had less than a high school degree, numbers had taken a dive, and we believe that's related to the lack of access to the internet, lack of computer equipment, lack of cell phones. We work through trust centers, faith-based institutions, schools, community centers, all of those shut down. And so our numbers of seniors and individuals or vulnerable disabilities went down as well. Our walk-ins, those numbers also fell. And so we've been very attentive to restore operations. We came back at full capacity on October 4th and opened to the public on October 11th. The challenge now is to balance the best of remote operations with live in-person assistance. We need to be in community, we need to be doing outreach, we need to be serving low-income communities in person, especially for those populations who do not have access through computer and leveraging technology. And so our challenge is the fact that some of our funders love the fact that we did great remote operations. They want us to keep it at full capacity and do on-site work as well at full capacity. Well, you need more funding for more staff to be able to do that. So balancing that out. With regard to the issues, along with Jim, housing is a huge issue here in Los Angeles County. I think we've lost a lot of people, have moved out of state. I think they've moved to Idaho, where there's a challenge to individuals there who had affordable housing and now are being priced out of the market. Here in Los Angeles, that has truly been the case for a long, long time. I think that for us today, again, ensuring that the digital divide doesn't leave our low-income communities behind, and that we are attentive to funding. Federal, state, local governments were very attentive to increasing funding during the COVID-19 pandemic. That funding will recede starting in 22-23. And so just being very attentive of how we will continue those operations. Thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan, what would you add?
I would echo a lot of the same themes. I guess I would start and quickly just note, obviously the pandemic has been incredibly challenging for our clients, but our staffs have also had a lot of challenges as well. And I will say particularly our staff who are parents with young children, it's been really a challenge for them to kind of navigate the last year and a half and deal with their personal lives and also serve our clients as well. And I will say the federal emergency leave benefits were really a lifeline for a lot of our staff with kids that really allowed them to kind of sustain their employment and do good work as they try to sort out their family situations at home. In terms of clients, access has been a real issue during the pandemic. We similarly looked at our numbers and really historically into the pandemic, our clients of color and our lowest income clients made more use of in-person services. whether that was coming to our offices or accessing us through in-person lawyer for the day. So the pandemic particularly hit those communities hard, and our numbers went down as we kind of moved through the pandemic. So what we've really tried to do is do our best to have services available on site for clients, and really what's struggling with what's the right balance between having services available on site and giving staff the flexibility they want and need during the pandemic. Where we have fallen down from the beginning. So let me say this, from the beginning, we gave staff the option to come to the office or work at home. So we never really closed our offices. So there's been a segment of the staff who have been here every day since the pandemic started, and other folks who work more remotely at home. As we moved along, we created a requirement that staff have to be in the office a certain amount of days a week. So where we are now is staff needs to be in 2 days a week. So everybody does that. But again, there's some staff who are here full time and who have been since the beginning. In terms of client access, people historically have accessed us from calling on the phone, applying on the internet, walking in the front door. When we closed the offices initially to the public, that was a challenge. Where we are now is we have our staff ready to greet people 2 days a week. So we accept walk-ins 2 days a week. And that's really expanded access to all the different communities we serve. And I will say on top of that, from the beginning, staff has really met with clients by appointment in all of our offices. So we never stopped doing that, which obviously is critically important. And I will say, I'm sure it's the same for the other programs. Our staff have really stepped up and sometimes put their own health to the side and met with clients way before there were vaccines, way before anybody thought it was safe. Staff have really stepped up and met folks in person where they needed to. And that's kind of where we are now. And that's really the challenge. You know, we're frontline workers. We need to give the client access to our services. We're essential workers. And how do you meet the balance? Like what's the right thing to do in terms of moving forward? But that's where we are now.
Thank you. And Kate.
Yeah, thank you, Ronke. I would echo a lot of what was said. We were also lucky to get the LSC funding to upgrade some of our technology to allow staff to go home. But similarly, some folks never left. And we brought people back early and reopened, looked statistically at some of our clinics and where were those places where we weren't reaching folks, whether it was the homeless clinics, restarting those earlier, or some of our other places. Part of the reason why we did come back earlier was that we have sort of a, I think, somewhat unique situation where Ohio has a very deregulated court system in the sense that there's a lot of leeway for each of our counties and how things are operated. And so in many of our counties, the courts never went remote. And that was particularly true in our rural counties, but not just our rural counties. Here in Franklin County, which is the capital, the court did close for about 6 weeks for evictions, 6 to 8 weeks for evictions, right? Last March. But then it reopened and it's been open ever since then. And we have a tenant advocacy project down there with 8 lawyers every day. And so they have been down there every day. What the court did instead of going remote was that they rented a bigger space. So they rented the convention center, which was not being used for conventions. It was used for eviction court and it was used as a field hospital for COVID. And so they continued in-person operations. That was true for a lot of our other courts. And so we were trying to juggle figuring out what was happening in each of these 36 different court systems, what their protocols were, which were all adjusting with COVID, as well as COVID safety protocols, as well as the rental assistance that has all come down through the community action agencies, of which we have 17 in our service area. And so navigating that has been a big challenge as we've sought to make sure that clients have representation, for those that we're not able to represent, that they have the advice and information that they need to do so effectively on their own. In terms of challenges, housing is an issue in Ohio as well. And we have a range of, in Columbus, where we really just don't have enough housing and have a huge affordable housing crisis. And in Southern Ohio, we do have housing, but it is not decent. It's not safe, it's not quality. And so, we are seeing folks who are living in some really terrible conditions. Or, if you go to a place like Portsmouth or Steubenville, what you'll see downtown is lots and lots of buildings, only a very fraction is habitable. And so it's still difficult to find places, even though there are these other structures, but they're just not habitable as they are. The other thing I would just mention on the digital divide is we've also seen that as a huge barrier for our clients in accessing our services and accessing court services, accessing lots of the world during COVID. And we see the mix where there is an affordability issue in our cities, and in Southeastern Ohio, there is an access in terms of it doesn't exist. And so there are even our staff who live in places that there is not the possibility of getting internet at their homes. And so we have sort of the full range of barriers for folks within our service area that has been really amplified during COVID.
Thank you so much. Kate, let's stay with you. So despite the hardships faced by so many, what are the bright spots in Ohio? How has the pandemic led to changes for the better?
Yeah. Well, thanks for that question. I think there's been a few things. I think one thing for everyone is the availability of rental assistance has been a game changer. For many of our clients in terms of keeping them in housing, the availability of that rental assistance has really been huge. In addition, it has brought in some other attention for the importance of civil legal services. Our media attention, I think, for our program, but I think nationally has really expanded with the pandemic and a spotlight on some of these really critical issues for low-income individuals that legal aids can and do help with. That attention that we have gotten has helped our funding overall. So we've certainly been lucky enough to get some of the funding that has come through the federal government and passed along. But we've also had some more opportunities with some of the corporate partners in Columbus who have seen some of the work that's been going on, whether it's down in eviction court, whether it's in some of our other communities, and have stepped up with decent amounts of funding that we had not previously seen before. So I think really some of that spotlight has helped fundraising in a broad range of areas. So we have been able to add staff during this time. At the beginning of the pandemic, we froze hiring, not just sure what would happen. A substantial portion of our funding is also tied to interest on lawyers' trust accounts, so that obviously declined. But despite that, we have seen a revenue increase, and we have been able to add staff during this time, which we anticipate being able to keep, given some of the other corporate donations that we have seen. And while we have seen some additional retirements during this time, it has not outpaced the new hiring. The other thing that I will say is, for any of you who know our program, we're sort of a accident of history and some different programs coming together. And the pandemic has actually been good for that, in the sense that you'll have staff who will say, for the first time, I really feel like I'm an OSLSA staff member, and that I'm not, just with the Portsmouth office or just with Columbus. We've done a really good job of doing all staff communication on a very regular basis in a way that we did not do before, of spotlighting staff, of spotlighting good client stories, of really spotlighting other sort of fun events that are happening in a way that we didn't do as regularly as we should have before. And that's been really good at bringing folks together. Also for our managers, we previously relied on sort of all-day meetings where we dragged everyone into Columbus, and now we're able to get together more frequently for shorter periods of time. And with the pace of change, that's been really important, but it's also helped to knit us together. So those have all been things that we hope to continue, that would not have happened, at least with the same speed, without the pandemic.
Thank you so much, Kate. I think we have a question from Matt.
Good afternoon. I always enjoy hearing from the executive directors because they represent the best of what LSC is all about. And I know there's a lot of acute problems right now, but I wanted to encourage you to think about something that's probably less pressing, but still is very near and dear to my heart, because I'm on the Ops and Regs committee for LSC. And what I am really committed to doing with Stephanie and Mark Friedman's help with LSC is to continue to identify those regulations that encumber your and your team's ability to do what they do best, which is advocate for their clients. And so in the next year, we're going to be working very hard to identify what are the kinds of things that you in the trenches would like to have tweaked. And so I've just asked you going forward, now we don't need to discuss it now, but going forward to keep those things in mind and communicate with Stephanie Davis when they become important, because we want to continue to do what we can to eliminate the burdens on the lawyers who already have their hands very full with their client needs. So that's all I was going to say.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, so Jim, I understand that you didn't hire a ton of new staff. Could you tell us a little bit more about why and what other changes you may have made instead in Idaho?
Yes, we are one of the programs that's very heavily dependent on the LSC for our funding. The majority of our funding is from the LSC. We do not receive any state funding. And so while we do have a very active fundraising effort with our own Access to Justice campaign and a lot of grant writing, because of that, we're a smaller program, and I tend to be very conservative when it comes to hiring because of sustainability issues. The other issue that we have, for example, right now we've gotten 4 federal grants in the last 2 months, and we have 5 positions that we are advertising for, and we are not getting applicants for those positions. There is just a shortage of attorneys, believe it or not, or at least attorneys that want to work for our salary, which is not the most competitive in the world. And again, this goes back to the housing issue. I think that a lot of out-of-state attorneys that want to come into Idaho, and there are lots of them, they don't want to start at our salary. And so we have, for example, in our Coeur d'Alene office, that's the one that had 39% increase in real estate last year. We have 3 open positions. I finally filled 1 today, and it's been about 2.5 months that I've had those positions. And so
so we brought you some good luck today, Jim, huh?
I hope so. And again, you know, part of it is the long arc of history, and I'd rather do a better job for the existing staff we have. We do have historically low salaries, and we've really been trying to increase the salaries, especially for our support staff, who I feel like at times that we have become oppressors, not paying them fairly. And so our goal has been to increase the salaries of all staff. And so that's really what we've done in terms of the staffing, but I've always had the philosophy that I want to get the biggest bang out of every dollar I get for our client community. And so one thing we've really turned to in the pandemic is technology. And in terms of technology, so our staff can continue to work seamlessly, whether at the office or at home, and flexible policies so we retain quality staff. Policies, we have lots of single moms. We have lots of people who've been caregivers. We've had lots of people that have gotten COVID and were still able to work, but they couldn't come into the office. And so we've tried to be as flexible there so we keep good people and avoid the disruptions from the pandemic.
And Jim, just to follow up on that, can you talk to us about your office reopenings and sort of how you all thought through that process and some of the challenges you faced?
Yeah, so what we did was last year, we decided we were going to Idaho had a very serious bout of COVID and continues today. And last year, we decided we were going to allow our staff to work either at home or in the office at their discretion until July 1st of this year. And we did that again, in part for retention issues, and mostly though for safety issues. As of July 1st of this year, we reopened the offices and required staff to return to the office. But we did realize at that time that basically all of our positions were fine remote working during the pandemic. So we said, if you've been with us for long enough and you're in good standing with your boss, you can have a telecommuting plan for up to 40% of your time. We instituted that. That was a new thing for me. I was opposed to that before the pandemic. But then what happened was Idaho has had very high COVID levels. So we've closed to the general public, but we do have the staff generally come into the office. We, during the pandemic, had a PhD in resiliency come and train our staff. And he really focused on the need for community, for organizations to get through traumatic situations. And that community is water cooler talk. It's seeing your coworkers at the office. And so we have tried to get people in the office, even if clients are not, it's not a walk-in environment. Clients can still come in, but the doors are not open to the general public. Clients come in on appointments, and we basically follow all the CDC guidelines. I will say one other thing that has been an issue with us, it has not been since we've been closed, but we had situations that were going to flare into violence with people about issues with masks and other things. And we just decided it would be easier for the support staff to just have the offices closed at this point. While we statewide, we are at a high transmission level of COVID according to the CDC. And it just was safer for us to stay closed until those transmission levels are reduced.
Thank you for elaborating. So Yvonne, I'm going to shift a little bit. Let's talk about your staff growth over the last 18 months. How has that impacted your organization and its culture, given so many new hires?
It impacted our organization significantly. As I said, we hired 66 new staff since March of 2020. Overwhelmingly, those new employees are attorneys. I've always felt that it's important for presence, for staff to be present for our clients. I told staff from the beginning that we would return to on-site operations at some portion of the time, but we would do that. And true to that, we reopened October 4th. We've grown so much that we cannot have all staff in the building at the same time. We follow CDC guidelines. We still have to do social distancing here in LA County. So half the staff comes in half the week and the other half comes in the other week. On October 4th, I did the circuit right to the offices to welcome all staff back. That started that day. We had welcome packets for everybody. We had NLSLA hats for everybody. I was very anxious about how people were going to feel. And the fact is, people were just overjoyed. People were emotionally overwhelmed because they had not seen their colleagues in 18 months. There was a set group of us that worked full-time in the offices during the pandemic, but most of the staff was working remotely. We had numbers of people who'd been hired who never met each other, never met their colleagues. It was always through Zoom. Wednesday, October 6th, I did it all over again for the other half of the staff. Again, the same reaction. And I think that it really broke down the barriers of people who felt anxious. I do feel like Jim and others have commented that to develop staff, to mentor staff, you have to be in person part of the time. Seasoned staff is modeling all the time, our training, the building relationships with your colleagues. There has to be that in-person contact. And it's really served us well. I think that moving forward, I hope that we will be able to increase our presence in community. We restored outreach in May of 2021. And then mostly by management staff, and then starting in September, staff began to restore outreach events. So I do think people are happy to be back. I think that we're looking at the needs of community, new needs that are being presented, and looking to serve individuals who are still facing some of those legal issues that were a crisis to begin with, access to housing, the access to healthcare. So I do think that staff is really happy that they're back. And I must say, we're unionized. We do have a union in this organization that really pushed back, but you know, fast forward to today, it's not been an issue. I think people are happy to be back and see each other at least part of the time.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. There's so much we could talk about with this panel because COVID has just really impacted the way that you all are operating. I have about 1 million questions, but in the interest of time, I am going to shift to invite questions from the board.
Okay, this is Father Pius. First, I just wanted to thank all of the executive directors for participating. It's interesting because we've got such a diverse sort of geographically and demographically and all the affectly with regards to the executive directors here. And there's some common threads and some different threads. I don't think you answer this question, but I'll just ask is, you know, based on what you've done in terms of your business model and your approach with COVID, is there anything that you think that, hey, we're just going to keep this, you know, this is so good and we never would have thought of this beforehand, but we're just going to go ahead and keep this after even when all the restrictions from COVID lift? If any of you want to, I see lots of heads nodding, but maybe Kate, if you've got anything.
I'll jump in quickly and then pass it along. And it touches on something actually that you all talked about earlier. So we switched immediately our pro bono clinics to virtual when COVID hit. And we have since, as I mentioned, brought some of those back in person based on need. But the virtual clinics for us who has a large urban area with a ton of attorneys, and then place like Benton County where there's really 4 attorneys, and that includes the judge and the prosecutor, we've really been able to use those virtual clinics to reach folks in Southeastern Ohio who wouldn't otherwise have been able to get to a clinic. And so for us, having the hybrid model of being able to do clinics in person for pro bono and then also virtually has really expanded access in our rural communities to pro bono services.
Similar to what Kate said, I think that our virtual models really attracted increased pro bono counsel participating in our clinics. And like Kate, although you may think LA County doesn't have rural areas, there is an area of our county that is. And so pro bono counsel coming in, it really increased our ability to serve that area. We also polled clients and community of what they thought about the remote operations. Many told us that they were really happy that they didn't have to go to the courthouse, they didn't have to come to our offices just to get their answers to the questions that they posed. Many of them were asking questions about all the laws that had been implemented for protections or help. How did that apply to them? And so the ability to be able to do that for clients was really great. So we're keeping the best of remote operations while being attentive to those areas that we need to respond to. So long story short, we will be keeping remote operations and being very strategic about that and responsive to the client community.
Do you think that the effectiveness of that remote operations, it depends, at least in some ways, to the courts themselves being more receptive to remote access? I think some courts have and some courts haven't. Does that play a role in the effectiveness of your own remote connectivity with your clients?
Absolutely. We're at the table with the Superior Court. It's very important to us that the digital divide doesn't leave our clients behind. One area of great impact is language access. Being in the courthouses, many people come to us sometimes just to have their court orders read to them or to explain to them. So the fact that the court does provide access via remote operations, we're very attentive to ensure that clients who don't have that technology are going to be able to appear in person, that domestic violence survivors are going to be able to get their restraining orders issued, and that judges not gravitate completely to remote operations, but be attentive to that digital divide for our clients.
Father Pius, I wanted to say just a few thoughts. First off, serving a large rural state has always been very difficult for us to provide the same level of access as you get in an urban area. It's just never happened. And the pandemic has resulted in both the courts and our organization and the private bar really, in a very compressed time, accepting technology such that a whole group of clients that would never have gotten served before is going to get served now. Just an example, the other day I was talking to our Lewiston office managing attorney, and he serves 6 counties, the biggest of which is, I think, the second biggest county in the United States. And normally it would be a couple-hour drive for him to get to court. And on that day that I talked to him, he had 3 clients he served via video streaming in 3 different rural courts in his area. And there would be no way he would have been able to do 1 before. On that day, he did 3. And the judges are very appreciative of this because the judges don't want a sea of a sea of pro se clients in there, of pro se litigants. Their outcomes are not as good, and they get frustrated with the judges. And so I think as a result of this, both the courts and our staff are going to be able to continue to serve more folks. And I also wanted to say, based on, I think it was Yvonne said something about domestic violence survivors, we have found that they are much more comfortable appearing in court virtually. Typically, they'll in the same office with our attorney, but they are not there with the perpetrator. And the stress level is far less. And so I think not only the technology issues, but I think most of our programs have probably had to become more efficient and adopt policies we probably wouldn't have adopted yet, but we felt like we had to during the pandemic. And I can't imagine many of us going back to the old way when, assuming COVID went away entirely tomorrow. I think most of us are going to stay with a lot of these policies. So I think there's been a lot of good that's come out of it.
Thank you. I want to open this up to the other board members to see if any board members have comments or questions.
Father Pius, I just also wanted to congratulate the directors for a very informative discussion. It's interesting. I mean, you sit on the board and you have a perspective, but it is so much better informed after hearing from you and learning about what you do to confront the various challenges and opportunities that are before you. There are not many folks who demonstrate the level of, I think, professionalism, courtesy, caring that you represent as a lawyer. And you make us all very proud. I just want you to know that. And I will tell Jonathan this. I think I'm losing my voice. Jonathan, I grew up going to summer camp from 11 to about 16 years old in North Brookfield, Massachusetts, which is not far from Worcester. And I would come back to Richmond, Virginia, where I live, and they would say, "Why did you go there?" It was because it was so far away. But I'd ride the train there, and what a great experience to be in another part of the country. And I think for many of us, what you do transcends geography and makes the legal profession a lot more relevant and important because of that. The area that you cover, the people that you see, the way in which you have to learn cultures from other countries and be immediately responsible for people's well-being and the turn of events that may impact their lives dramatically. So bless you and thank you so much for all you do.
Robert once again summarizes the view of the entire board only far more eloquently than all of us. So thank you very much, Robert. Were there any other questions? Matt, did you have a question?
Well, that's a tough act to follow, but what I want to tell Jonathan and Kate and Yvonne and Jim is that we get it, we understand, and we fight for you. And we have a wonderful team with Carol and Ron and John. And I want you to know that this board really gets in the weeds a lot. And we are fighting for you, basically, whether it's financial, whether it's awareness, visibility. I'm in Kansas City. Both my Republican senators are very supportive of LSC and its mission. And so I want you to know that our ears are to the ground, and you have very strong advocates here with our board and the whole LSC team. So that's all I wanted to add.
Good. I just wanted to thank especially Ron Kay for putting together really a fabulous board and for running this panel together as she did so well. And thanks especially to Jim, Jonathan, Yvonne, and Kate. Thanks for taking time to be with us, and thanks for helping us to understand some of the challenges that you faced and some of the real successes that you've had in meeting those challenges and improving the work that you do to the poor. So on behalf of the board, again, thank you all very much.